This last thing before we get to some of the mailbag questions, it was something that came up on the Flyers Daily interview with Martinez with Danny Briere last week that I mentioned. And I meant to bring this up on the show, never quite got to it, and then I got a DM about it. It was like, oh, shit, I do need to talk about that when me and Charlie are back together. He mentioned Martinez asked Briere, what are the benefits of Michkov coming over early? He said one of the big benefits is he gets to play for the head coach, John Tortorella. And it just kind of struck me as like, oh, so if he had been on the original time frame, we don't think John Tortorella would be the head coach. And I know we've talked about that a lot since the hiring of John Tortorella. We've been like, since that day, we've been like, yeah, I don't see him being the head coach of this team for 10 years. I see him having another role in the organization in some way because of the way he talks about, okay, if you're going to restore the Flyers to respectability, and if this is a rebuild, it's going to take longer than the contract you signed to do that. Yeah. So you would think. But the fact is, when you hire a coach, typically one of two things happens. They get fired before their contract is up, or they sign an extension. A lot of coaches recently have signed extensions and been fired before they kick in. But
gotta love the NHL.
It's tremendous. And now, like, oh man, Knobloch takes over, goes to Game 7. It's going to happen even more now. But it's just, I realized the length of his contract, the Michkov timeline. It was like, okay, well, those two things are at odds. But like, usually when you hire a coach, it's okay, we want to keep him for as long as we can until he gives us reason not to. I don't think Tortorella's given him that reason yet, but there's kind of the allusion to, oh, he gets to play for Tortorella, which we weren't really counting on when we drafted him. Does that strike you at all?
It's funny because it didn't strike me even a little bit as weird when I heard it, because he said it on multiple occasions. He said it on Flyers Daily. He said it to us on July 1st, I believe, that, you know, he's really excited that Michkov is going to get coached by John Tortorella, you know, potentially for 2 years, at the very least for one, depending upon what decisions Tortorella makes at the end of the season. It didn't strike me as weird because, like, the way that Tortorella's contract is set up, it was a 4-year contract. So this is year 3. He has one more year, the 2025-2026 season. And the way Michkov's original deal with his KHL club was set up, he would be coming over in 2026-2027. So after the Torts contract expired. So for me, it was less like we know for a fact that Torts is going to last past his contract, and more that we just don't know. You know, we just don't know if he would have still, if there was a scenario where he would have still been the coach in 2026-2027, he would have had to decide he wants to keep coaching at age 68, which, like, that's a stretch. The Flyers would have had to decide that we want him to keep coaching, that he's doing a good enough job. There couldn't have been some sort of internal blow up. Like, there are a lot of variables that would have been not necessarily a way to make sure it's not possible, but ways where the contract just isn't extended or he gets fired or whatever. Whereas now you know that he's getting coached by John Tortorella at least for a year because he's still under contract. He's obviously coming back. Look, there's always going to be speculation around John Tortorella that at the end of a season, he's just going to decide, that's it, I'm done. Like, there's people you talk to who are convinced, like people I talk to who are convinced that, like, this is going to be his last year. Well, he has one more contract. Yeah, he won't do it past this year. But there were people I talked to in last summer that were convinced that he wasn't going to go into this year. So there's always going to be those theories, those scuttlebutts, whatever, that, you know, oh, well, Torts is going to hang him up. And Torts keeps saying he's not going to, but presumably at some day in the future, he's going to decide, I'm done with this shit. I want to relax and, you know, take my talents upstairs a little bit. I didn't see it as that big of a deal, but it is notable that Briere's implication is that maybe they don't envision Torts lasting past the 4th year, that is the hard stop, and that's when they're going to be looking for another option. It's interesting. It's not something that jumped out at me because I guess I've never viewed it as highly likely he's going to get a 5th year, because I'm not even convinced he's going to get to year 4.
Yeah, like, it's just, I've always figured that was the way it was going to go, but it seemed like a direct indication for the first time. Because when John Tortorella's been asked about it, like publicly. And listen, he could say anything to the. We know he just says whatever the fuck he feels like to the media, whether it's true or not. And then people behind the scenes, he'll have a different story if need be. But like every time it's come up to him, he's like, I have no plans on any of that. I'm a coach. And it's just odd that this is like a public acknowledgement of what we thought. That's all.
Yeah.
I don't think it's the craziest thing in the world. Again, he just turned 66. Like
the contract expires when he's 68.
Expires at that point.
When he's 68.
What's he?
I'm not saying it is impossible that a 68-year-old John Tortorella comes to the Flyers, or I guess he would probably do it like next summer and say, I want to keep coaching. Let's work on an extension. Because very few coaches like to be a lame duck. Yeah. It's just not something coaches like to do. It's like, I either want the extension or I want to know that this is probably my last year. I guess it's possible that 67, 68-year-old Torts is like, nah, I want to coach till I'm 80. That I want to be the Lou of coaching. It's possible. I just have never viewed it as terribly likely.
And it's, I guess, and these are all, I mean, he's, except for Columbus, much younger at these times. But I know we think of John Tortorella as a guy who's like message wears thin with players, but 6.5 years in Tampa, came on at the end of 08-09 with the Rangers, then did 4 more seasons after that. Obviously, the 1 year in Vancouver. But that's the aberration here. Yeah. We've
said this multiple times.
5-6 years in Columbus. Like, he actually, if he only lasts 4 years here, that's his shortest stint anywhere except for Vancouver.
And 4 years is pretty long for an NHL coach.
Jesus, yeah. It's really long. Yeah. It's just funny to think that, I don't know, like, this is year 3 and it could be over already. That's just odd.
At the very least, he's going to get the start of this year.
He's getting this.
We've talked about it, how, if this is an AV situation where after a month it's clear that the team didn't forgive him for all the shit he pulled at the end of the season, who knows? But the Flyers are certainly planning at the very least for him to be the coach for this season. And I think the Flyers have every expectation he coaches out the contract. After the contract expires, who knows?
We all silly like the mayor.